Rome had prevailed. The legions returned, and with them came something history books prefer not to describe. Picture it for a moment. You are standing on a dust-choked road in the year 70 AD. In the distance, a triumphal column advances toward the Eternal City. Banners ripple in the breeze. Armor flashes beneath the sun. Soldiers march in flawless formation, and among them, bound together by iron chains, are hundreds of women with hollow eyes. Women who already understand that death would have been mercy compared to what awaits them. This is an account of what followed Roman conquest, of what happened when the legions took a city, of the fate reserved for female prisoners of war, of practices that transformed military victory into something far darker than simple territorial control. What you are about to hear is not imagination. It is preserved in generals' letters, in the writings of ancient historians, in legal proceedings that have survived nearly 2,000 years. And yet, it has been carefully excluded from school curricula and major cinematic portrayals because some truths are too unsettling to be taught openly. Before we continue into this history deliberately forgotten, support this channel dedicated to uncovering the past as it truly was. Subscribe and leave a like. It is a small gesture, but it allows us to keep revealing what power worked so hard to erase. We are taught about Rome's glory, about invincible legions that conquered the known world, about victorious generals returning home, parading along the Via Sacra as crowds erupted in celebration, about prisoners of war displayed as living proof of imperial dominance. The official story is straightforward. The captives became slaves. They were sent to mines, to farms, to the homes of wealthy patricians. A brutal fate, certainly, but one presented as a normal consequence of ancient warfare. This is the version that endures. Clean, orderly, but the surviving documents tell another story. According to a military report preserved in the British Museum, dating to the reign of Trajan, after the Roman conquest of Dacia in 106 AD, approximately 15,000 women were taken captive. The official record mentions only their distribution among the legions and their subsequent transfer to the provinces. Distribution. A word so administrative, so bloodless, until personal accounts are read, letters written home, private diaries discovered in abandoned forts, notes never intended for history. Then that word begins to mean something else entirely, because what happened to these women before they ever became domestic slaves was a ritual of systematic humiliation, a celebration of victory carved into the bodies of the defeated, a political act masked as battlefield brutality. But can it even be called brutality when it was calculated, organized, and approved by the Roman state itself? When a city fell, there was a sequence, not chaos procedure. First, men of fighting age were separated. Some were executed immediately. Others were spared for the arena. Children and the elderly were deemed useless, abandoned, left behind, or eliminated depending on logistical necessity. Then came the women. Young women formed the third category. They were treated differently. They were assembled in the central square of the conquered city, stripped and exposed beneath the sun and the gaze of the entire legion. They remained there for hours, sometimes days, while officers conducted their selections. The most physically attractive were marked with red dye on the left shoulder and set aside for commanders. The remainder were allocated to rank and file soldiers. There was even a formal Latin designation for this process: praeda bellica feminarum, female war spoils. The term appears in military manuals, in official correspondence. Yes, taxes were levied on this property. A fragment of a letter discovered in Pompeii, written by a legionary named Marcus Flavius during the campaign in Germania, describes the scene with unsettling detachment. I took 3 for myself on the first night. The youngest cried without stopping. The second tried to bite. The third simply stared at nothing, as if she were already gone. I preferred the third. She was easier. That word, easier, echoes across centuries because it exposes something fundamental about this violence. It was not driven solely by desire. It was about domination, about erasing dignity before erasing identity, about converting human beings into objects before formally enslaving them. Roman generals understood the political purpose of this ritual with absolute clarity. This was not about allowing soldiers to release tension after long campaigns. It was a demonstration of total power, a message delivered without ambiguity to any population that considered resistance. This is what happens to your daughters, your sisters, your wives, and the message was effective. The Roman historian Tacitus wrote of the revolt led by Boudica in Britain in 60 AD. He records that Boudica herself and her daughters were publicly violated by Roman officers after their capture, not as personal punishment, but as a calculated example meant to establish imperial authority. The warrior queen who dared to defy Rome was reduced to spectacle. Her daughters, princesses by birth, were transformed into instruments of instruction. When Boudica later rallied her forces again, she was not fighting merely for land. She fought for something far older and far more visceral, for revenge that could never truly be satisfied, for dignity that could never be restored, for screams forced into silence. She was defeated, and what became of the women of her tribe after the final suppression was never fully recorded. We know only this: Britannia did not rebel again for 3 centuries. Is silence always evidence of peace? Or is it sometimes the result of terror so complete that even speech is taken away? But this was only the beginning. After the first days, after the ritual of domination, came the bureaucratic phase. The conversion of people into property. This was the next phase. The transformation of human beings into property. The survivors were branded, literally, hot irons pressed into flesh, burning symbols that identified the legion that captured them, and the specific campaign in which they were taken. Marks of ownership carved into skin, often on the face, so their condition could never be concealed. Then came transport. Chained together in groups of 10 or 20, they were forced to march hundreds of kilometers toward the ports. There, they waited in dark, damp warehouses. The same buildings used to store grain and olive oil until enough ships were available. They were stored. A commercial inventory preserved in Alexandria, dated to 115 AD, records the mixed cargo of a merchant vessel, 340 amphorae of wine, 120 barrels of wheat, 89 women from Judea, 14 Berber horses, women listed alongside wine and horses, same ledger, same accounting category, same logistical value. The sea crossing lasted weeks. They were kept below deck, chained in rows, with barely enough space to sit upright, no room to lie flat. Daily rations were calculated precisely to keep them alive, nothing more. Many died during the journey: disease, dehydration, or simply surrender. The bodies were thrown into the sea without ritual or record. There exists an economic calculation preserved in a Roman treatise on estate management, written in the 1st century by Columella. He estimated that an acceptable loss rate during the transport of female war captives was between 20 and 30%. Acceptable, as though discussing spoiled produce. When they finally arrived in Rome or other major cities of the empire, the next stage began. The auctions, specialized markets where wealthy buyers inspected human merchandise as one would inspect livestock, hands probing flesh, teeth examined, mouths forced open, signs of illness, injury, or pregnancy carefully checked. The youngest and most physically desirable commanded enormous prices. They were purchased by patricians, by elite brothels, by temples that offered specialized services to devotees of certain Eastern cults. The rest, the women whose appearance had deteriorated during the journey, those marked by too many scars, those who resisted, those who had broken mentally, were sold in bulk. Mines, farms, workshops. In those places, life expectancy rarely exceeded 5 years, but there was a fate considered worse than the mines: the brothels. Specialized establishments that operated openly in every Roman city, legal, regulated, taxed. The Roman state profited from every transaction, and female prisoners of war were the most sought-after commodity. Why? Because they were foreign, because they came from defeated peoples, because violating the daughter of an enemy offered ordinary Roman citizens a sense of participation in imperial conquest. A man who had never carried a shield or drawn a sword could, for a few coins, feel like a victor, a conqueror by proxy. A piece of graffiti found in Pompeii, scratched onto the wall of a brothel, reads simply, "Here I penetrated a Briton." Rome was eternal. Even the most intimate act was transformed into a political declaration. The women in these places had no names. They were identified only by origin: the Gaul, the German, the Jewess. They worked in cubicles smaller than 2 square meters, no windows. A single curtain as a door. They serviced between 10 and 20 men per day. There was no retirement, no release, no exit. Many turned to suicide. Others lost their sanity completely. A very small number survived long enough to be freed. But even freedom did not erase what had been done. The brand on the face remained. The memory in the body remained. In the 2nd century, a Roman physician named Soranus of Ephesus wrote a treatise on gynecology. One chapter addressed illnesses common among women used in war prostitution. He described chronic inflammation, premature infertility, recurring hemorrhages. Then he added, almost as a passing remark, brothel owners are advised to renew their stock every 3 or 4 years, as after this period, the merchandise loses commercial value and productive capacity. Renew the stock, as one might replace broken jars. And all of this entire industrial system of dehumanization functioned openly. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was denied. There was no shame. It was simply considered the natural order of things, the logical outcome of military victory. Rome won, and the defeated paid with everything they were and everything they might have become. The question lingers, how much of this calculated coldness still survives in modern wars, merely under different names? Behind that wall of historical silence lies something even darker. There are almost no first-person accounts. The victims themselves left no written testimony. They could not write the language of their conquerors. They had no access to materials. And even if they had, who would have recorded their words? Yet, there are rare exceptions. Disturbing. In the 2nd century, a woman named Blandina appears in early Christian writings. She was a slave, originally captured during a campaign in Gaul. While serving in a Roman household, she converted to Christianity. When her faith was discovered and she was arrested, she spoke during interrogation about her past. One surviving fragment records her words,